Hi everyone, welcome back to Harp and Guitar, People and Music. So for today in blues history, I thought I'd do a quick review here before we jump to the 1940s. Now so far we've talked about proto-blues like work songs and field hollers and that sort of thing. And we've also talked about how this early form of blues not only gave birth to blues itself, but to jazz and to Western swing, which later became country music. And basically these are all just general forms of folk music. Now, blues had a little bit of a rough go through the 1930s, and that was mostly because of the Great Depression, and we talked about that here on other videos. The problem was there wasn't as much money to go around, and they were basically cutting back on recording and pressing and releasing records, and people didn't have money to buy records anyway. So they were only recording the huge stars at the time, the big, what we call the classic blues, through the late 20s and into the 30s. Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Lonnie Johnson, Louis Armstrong, and a lot of big band stuff was coming around this time as well. Now the other thing was that through the late 30s, there was a bit of a social and political problem that affected the recording of blues and jazz and other similar music as well. And that was the Jim Crow laws in the South. See, the problem through the 30s was that plantations and farms started to become more and more mechanized. So it was displacing a lot of the African American workers. So therefore, a lot of times they became migrant workers and would have to have jobs through several seasons through different counties or even through different states. They would follow the seasons of the harvesting of crops and so forth. But the problem was that if you couldn't prove under Jim Crow laws in the South that you had a legitimate job with an actual employer, you could be arrested for vagrancy and then be put to work on a work farm. As a result, a lot of African Americans were moving up north. They were getting jobs in factories that paid better, and although the working conditions were still pretty bad, they weren't as bad as working out in the hot sun down in the South. And when a lot of these workers went north, they took their music with them, blues and jazz. Blues from the, quote, Mississippi Delta and also from Texas and Florida, but also jazz from Florida, New Orleans, up north into places like St. Louis and Chicago and New York, specifically Harlem, and that's where you get the Harlem Renaissance jazz movement and that sort of thing. So there was a large movement of the people taking the music up to the northern states, where they had a little bit of a better life ahead of them. And that's right around the time that a lot of the recordings were really starting to wind down, and they weren't pressing as many and selling as many records as well. And that's what makes stuff by, for example, this guy, Robert Johnson, just to throw a recognizable name out there, that's what makes stuff by somebody like Robert Johnson so rare, is because that there's just not that much of it out there. However, a good example of a guy that we will talk about going forward through the late 30s as we transitioned into the 1940s is Leadbelly. And we've talked about Leadbelly a little bit, and I think some of you may be familiar with these old records of Leadbelly that I have, these old recordings. Leadbelly is a great example of this transitionary time period because he recorded a lot of old songs in the 30s, and some of them were in the style of earlier forms of proto-blues. But he also recorded a lot of stuff in the 1940s and even after the war. So we have a broad range of recordings from a guy who has a repertoire that spans 40 or 50 years in a time frame. So going forward, right here on Harp and Guitar, as we move into the 40s, we're going to talk about people like Robert Johnson and Leadbelly and many others as that time was shifting into the new decade. So thanks a lot for tuning in today. We'll talk to you again real soon. Take care, everybody. And if you haven't already, please like, share the video. Let us know what you think down below. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thanks a lot. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.